Hi, welcome again to the Atomic Core podcast series, Cybersecurity Q&A for Open Source Security. Today's session will explore a new and unusual type of attack on vulnerabilities, one that involved 2.5 years of planning and patiently executed psychological pressure and manipulation of a human being. I'm talking about the XZ Utils backdoor attack campaign. Welcome Mike Shin, who will be with me to analyze the recent XZ attack and how it has shifted attention to an uncommon type of vulnerability, a sustained psychological attack on an open source developer. When I researched this event, Mike, it struck me as something out of a TV spy drama or science fiction novel, but it's real. Can you tell us what XZ Utils is and explain for our audience what happened?
Yeah, so most people are familiar with the program WinZip or zip files, or maybe even RAR files, but compressed files. So the XZ Utils are a whole set of free lossless data compressors. Lossless meaning those of us that are familiar with compressed songs or movies or TV shows, you'll see loss sometimes in the video. The quality may go down as it gets more compressed and decompressed. Lossless compression is a way of compressing things so that when you decompress them, you get back exactly what you have in it and you don't lose it. So in computing, these tools are used in places where we can't afford to lose any data. So a command stream or something like that, where, maybe if we lose a little fidelity in a song or we lose some resolution in a TV show, it's not going to cause us to not be able to hear or see or understand what we're looking at. But if we have two computers talking to each other and say they're sending commands back and forth, we can't have a compression algorithm that's going to lose data. So the XZ Utils are widely used in various operating systems, but primarily in Unix-based operating systems. But also it's included in Microsoft Windows.
And so the second part of that question is, can you explain what happened in this attack? It was a very bizarre type of attack. Can you explain what happened in the attack on the XZ repository?
So the XZ Utils are a widely used lossless data compression tool set, and it's primarily for Unix-based operating systems like Linux, but it's also available on Microsoft Windows. And what's unique about lossless data compressors is that most of us are familiar with WinZip or zip files or RAR files or whatever the case may be. But we're also familiar with, digital music, streaming TV shows and so on. And, we have bandwidth issues or whatever the case may be, you'll see the quality of maybe the TV show will go down. Or for those of you that have been around for a long time, you may remember, MP3s and compressed music. And you would get, as you would make the file smaller and smaller, the quality would go down. So those are compression algorithms that are lossy. They lose data. When you decompress them, you get back an approximation of what you have. So that's fine for data that we can afford to lose some information, like a video broadcast or a song or whatever the case may be. But if we can't afford to lose any data, for example, if we have two computers that talk to each other and they're sending commands back and forth, we have to make sure we don't lose a single bit of data. So we need what's called a lossless data compression algorithm. And the XZ Utils are widely used to do this. And, and that's primarily their function, but they could be used for other things. The XZ Utils project was targeted by, near as we can tell, probably a nation state actor. As Dean mentioned, this attack took several years, and it does read like something out of a spy novel. It's definitely a sophisticated attack, and it's sophisticated in the sense of how the attack was carried out. Briefly, the attack was targeted at a human being, and not in sort of the traditional way that we tend to think of hacking. like somebody sent you a file and you clicked on it and you took over your computer, or phishing, they tricked you into giving up your credentials. This was, as Dean said, a targeted psychological attack at the developer of the XZ Utils project, what is now in some circles called a pressure attack. The idea here is that you apply psychological pressure to a person to get them to fold, to do what you want them to do. And what's interesting about this one is this psychological attack wasn't blackmailing somebody or threatening harm to them or trying to give them money. It was a sustained psychological operation to get this person essentially to, turn over or to allow a third party to join this project and to be able to add code. And this was done through a series of what are sometimes called sock puppets, which are fake accounts or whatever the case may be, putting pressure on the developer, telling them they were doing a terrible job. They weren't, keeping up with the project. They weren't fixing bugs that, let somebody else do it or whatever the case may be. And then you had these sock puppets that were saying, hey, I know a guy and he's really good and you should trust him. And this took an extended period of time. Eventually it worked. This person, the attacker, was added to the project, and they didn't immediately do anything malicious. They spent years building up a reputation as a seemingly benign, reliable, thankless member of the team who was adding features and fixing bugs. And then they slipped their backdoors into the code. We can talk about that in a moment here, which was also fairly sophisticated. And this backdoor was essentially discovered by accident. It wasn't discovered, by the project. It wasn't discovered because, some cybersecurity company or engineers or whatever was looking at this code. It was actually a Postgres developer at Microsoft, and he discovered this by accident. He found that there were some odd symptoms around this one of the libraries that was part of the package, and that the SSHD daemon, which is a piece of software that's used to log into Unix-based and Linux systems, was just taking more CPU than it normally should, and in a very small, not something that most people would even notice. So this was really fortunate that this person discovered this backdoor, and it was a very sophisticated backdoor. It's not that he discovered, oh, wow, there's a backdoor in this. It was, this unrelated piece of software, SSH, is acting strange or not acting normal, and not even in a gross, obvious way. It was just using up more CPU. Things were taking a little bit longer than they should. Something was just slightly off. So every piece of this was very sophisticated. The mechanism the adversaries used to gain access to the software, the changes that they made to the software were very hard to detect, and such that, it was essentially discovered by accident.
Mike, once the backdoors were detected, what were the potential, kind of downstream targets of the backdoor? Where were they hoping to work their way into?
Yeah, so near as what we can tell at this point from what we know, this backdoor allowed an attacker to gain complete control of a system remotely, and then at that point you could do whatever you wanted. It was affecting this otherwise widely regarded, highly secure software, SSHD, and this backdoor was not in SSHD itself. It was in the XZ projects, the lib, one of the libraries in it, which was able to affect this other piece of software. So an even more sophisticated attack, right? It wasn't a supply chain attack on the remote access software. It was a supply chain attack on another library that otherwise, is used in lots of different things in the system, but was able to specifically affect the SSHD or what's called secure shell. That's its name.
Yep.
Remote access software. So it really is a pretty slick backdoor, and again, we don't know precisely who did this, but we've inferred that this has got to be a nation state actor, because just the sheer amount of time and resources and everything else that went into this is certainly within the realm of a nation state actor, right? They've got the time, the resources, and the money. It could very well be that it's not a nation state, but it's definitely something a nation state could do, or a very determined non-nation state actor that has the time and the expertise to craft a backdoor like this.
Is compromise of this code still a lingering threat in programs, such as, Debian, Fedora, Unix?
So the short answer is no, we all dodged a bullet. These changes were in effectively a cutting edge version of this software that wasn't used in, most of the commercial operating systems that, are in place, your Red Hats, your Ubuntus, and your so on. But it was in advanced, shall we say, call them beta or alpha quality releases of those operating systems. So if you were maybe a super early adopter, or if you were a developer or somebody who was, working with one of these, beta quality, alpha quality pre-releases, for lack of a better word, then yeah, you would have been exposed. But, we dodged a bullet in the sense that,
Gotcha. Yeah.
There's a lot of appliances and devices and things out there that are based on Linux, and near as we know, that doesn't appear any of those kinds of things were affected. People's home routers and things like that weren't running this newer version. But there was one Linux distribution, I don't recall off the top of my head which one it was, that's more on the cutting edge, that would pull in the newest versions of software. So there was one distribution out there that happened to have it if you had updated. And I don't recall what that is off the top of my head. Maybe you remember, Dean, from your research. But your major commercial operating systems, your Oracle Linux, your Red Hats, your Ubuntus, things of that nature, Microsoft Windows and so on, didn't. But they very well could have. This, and eventually, if Andre, as the name of the person who discovered the vulnerability, or Andres, if Andres hadn't discovered this, it very well, eventually, this backdoor would have ended up in, shall we call them mainstream operating systems eventually,
Yeah, it's made Andres a bit of an internet hero for a while.
Yeah. I mean, this is, it's a game changer in the sense that the mechanism, if you will, the means by which the project was compromised isn't in fact new, right? It's sort of the oldest trick in the book, right? It's the long con. It's a con artist. It's a grifter, whatever you want to call it. You trick somebody to letting you in, and it's the long con, right? They don't immediately rip you off. They don't immediately, steal your car or whatever the case may be, right? They've spent several years building trust, and then suddenly one day, they're gone, and all your furniture and your your jewelry is missing, right? And this person has headed off to their next victim. So in that sense, it was old, but for cyber, it's really kind of new, because that takes a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And typically what we see is, either something that's fairly straightforward, somebody gets something sent to them and their computer gets compromised, and then the bad guy makes modifications to their code. And we've seen that happen with commercial software companies Even big cybersecurity companies have had that happen. There's been, a phishing attack or something, and they're, a developer or somebody in the organization's computer gets broken into, and then the adversary gets access to the source tree, and they modify the software and they put a backdoor in it, and it gets shipped out to their customers. That's so far really what we've seen. What we haven't seen at this point, or what we haven't detected at this point, is this level of sophistication, patience, to break into a project. And if it hadn't been for what might be a flaw in this backdoor, it's possible this backdoor might not have been detected. I mean, the actual backdoor itself is pretty obfuscated, right? It's not obvious that the payload is a backdoor. It's a very sophisticated attack, and it begs the question, right? How many others are out there? We really just don't know. And there are people in the community who are, looking at things like the GitHub, trying to scan all of GitHub and other source code repositories to try and see, could there be other backdoors out there that we don't know about? But this one was so sophisticated, it may not be possible to detect the other ones that are out there.
Yeah. Now that we know these types of attacks, can happen, what kind of measures or reforms can be introduced, on open source and other community software development sites to try to prevent this from ever happening again? That sustained pressure by almost like a mob, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it. I mean, the thing about this is, again, it's not technically new, right? It's done in other areas in life, right? There's whole movies. The plot is all based on the long con or whatever the case may be. So there are things we can take from thousands of years of human history about, all right, well, how do we protect ourselves from a trusted insider, which is really what this is in this particular case. For these open source software projects, some of my colleagues in the community who run projects or involved in projects are naturally concerned about this because, it's a typical open source project is a volunteer activity. Someone's not being paid to do it. They're doing it effectively out of the kindness of their heart. And, how much money, time, and resources are you going to apply to, vetting other people that join your project? Is it likely that you're ever going to meet this person in person? So you don't have some of the, shall we say, sort of natural tools that we have available. Like, you meet somebody and there's just something off about them, or, the car they drive doesn't match their story, or, you get a gut feeling or whatever the case may be. So it's harder, right, in a purely virtual world. But, there are things that, people are talking about now doing, like, some projects already had requirements that to join the project, you had to meet other people, over Zoom or something like that, so people could see you and know that you were a real person. But there's also talk about changing the way that projects respond to what some people call pressure campaigns, pushy users, people who are unpleasant, and maybe not being as responsive to users, maybe being, more, careful about who you listen to, maybe just blocking people. If you're going to be rude, we're just going to block you from this project altogether. It'll be interesting to see where this goes, because it really speaks to the nature of how open source software is developed, and how users interact with developers and how developers respond. So this is an open question, right? How are people going to protect themselves from this specific vector? The psychological attack, being able to worm your way into a project and then do something malicious. So it's an open question. It's definitely you know, fortunately not something that's completely new, right? Humanity's dealt with this before, but it's definitely new for in this context.
I think we're going to be revisiting, these types of non-software related vulnerabilities and attacks that, don't involve going directly after the software first.
Yeah,
But is there
yeah.
anything else you want to say today uh, about this topic?
I mean, there's probably a lot more that I can say about it. I mean, the takeaway for anybody should be that, it's always been impossible to write software that is guaranteed to be free from vulnerabilities. It's just it's the more sophisticated the software gets, at a certain point, it becomes impossible to model it. There's not really a way to be able to look at a piece of software and say, yeah, we got everything. There's no vulnerabilities in it. And that's just the nature of humanity, right? Humans are imperfect. Humans make mistakes. Humans write the software. They write the programming languages. They write the tools that we use to compile it and assemble it and link it and push it out and so on and so on and so on. So the takeaway should be, first of all, you should always assume that every single piece of software that you have has some kind of a vulnerability in it. That's going to be the case probably forever, unless we've come up with some new magical way to model software. But the other thing that we should also assume is that there are probably backdoors in the software that we're using right now that we, the vendor, nobody knows about. So when you're thinking about how do you protect yourself from these things, start with that, right? That's the best way to start thinking about security, right? Everything I have has got some vulnerability in it that I don't know about, that some bad guy knows about, and it's got a backdoor in it that some bad guy knows about. So how am I going to protect myself? And fortunately, we largely know how to do that, right? We don't rely on one thing. We do defense in depth. We put all kinds of protection measures in place and recovery and so on and so forth. Just look at the way that we live our own lives, right? It's not possible for us to create a world that is risk-free in the real world. So we do things to compensate for that, right? We have spare tires in our cars. We have fire extinguishers. Hopefully you do. In your home, you have a smoke detector. You have home insurance. You have car insurance. You have, depending on where you live, you've got, life insurance, healthcare provided in some way, be it insurance or some government-run program and so on, because it's not possible to, even in the real world, live without risk. We can't. Nobody's bulletproof, nobody's waterproof, nobody's fireproof, right? So you have to take that same philosophy and apply it to cyber, and that's how you that's honestly how you really deal with this kind of thing. If just looking at the XZ backdoor. Let's say you had a whole bunch of systems in your enterprise that had that backdoor in it. But if you were applying defense in depth and you had other security measures in place, maybe something as simple and unexciting as a firewall, so nobody could get to those systems, right? That could be enough to protect you. So that's really the takeaway, right? We're definitely living in a world where we know there are sophisticated adversaries that have the time, the money, the resources, and the expertise to add highly sophisticated, very hard to detect backdoors into core pieces of operating systems that, in this case, if it had gotten into all the commercial operating systems that we use, would have provided them with unfettered access to the system that, if they had tweaked their backdoor just a little bit more, we probably would not have been able to easily detect that backdoor, and they may have been able to, operate with impunity for a while, and that could be happening right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. For the audience, we hope you found this podcast informative. We'll probably be talking about this strange attack method and the implications of it again. And please stay tuned for our next broadcast.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.